Welcome, Dr. Anderson, for our interview today. You've recently published a very interesting book for me. Basically, outside the box cancer therapies is the title, and there's a lot of books coming out recently about the integrative and metabolic approach to cancer, evidence-based books. So we had a very good talk recently with Naisha Winters about the more psychosomatic effects involved in cancer, but you wrote a very interesting book more about the technical aspects of treatment and almost all the basics one needs to know to treat cancer.
Yes, well, thank you. Our book was about a year after Naisha's book, and the nice part about that was because of Naisha's book being so complete, especially with the dietary interventions and some of the metabolic specifics, we were able to back up a little bit and, of course, include some of that, but also include a lot of the other therapies that are available. And what we really wanted to do was to write the book so that any patient could read it or their family. So it's written very conversationally, but we have references that are more like a textbook would be a reference. And so our goal there was we never know who the healthcare practitioner the patient might see is, and that way they would have references if they were concerned about certain therapies or where to look up more about the therapy. So that was our real goal, was to, we knew Naisha's book was out there, so we didn't have to redo all of that. And we wanted to go in a broader direction.
Yeah, that's great. It's a very good addition, or very good, it fits in well. So how did you,
Thank you.
Tell me a little bit about your history. How did you get into maybe even the naturopathic medicine, and then later into the cancer world and the cancer treatment?
Well, yes, I'll give you the very short version of the history. So about 42 years ago, I started working in medical lab world. And I did that for a number of years, even owned my own lab at one point. And I knew that I was getting frustrated in that end of medicine. And I also knew that I was looking for some way to interact with patients that would be much more eclectic. And when I looked around, I found naturopathic medicine and investigated that some more. And so became a naturopathic medical doctor. I practiced that in the northwest of the U.S. for quite a while. The way that both, and so my co-author, Mark Stengler, and myself both went to the same medical school. We went about the same time. And in those days, you certainly didn't advertise that you did anything with cancer patients at all. It was very, very antagonistic back then. And so what happened really was patients would come and find you and seek out your advice. And what we found in the earlier days is there was a big learning curve for everybody, really, because there wasn't a lot of published information or just information about integrative cancer. And so that led us both, and we practiced in two different areas. So it led us both for about a 20-year period of exploration and learning and research in similar but different areas. So when we met about a year and a half ago and decided to put the book together, what we found was, because we had evolved in these different kind of tracks with integrative cancer, we were very complementary in the depth of knowledge we knew about different things. And so we literally split the book in half, and we each wrote chapters that we felt were more for what we knew. And then we traded them and added for across. The thing that we didn't realize from the outset, we wanted to do it, we didn't know how much we would do, is we have almost 1,100 references for the book. And so it's quite a well-referenced book. And like I said, we did that for the sake of the healthcare practitioners the patient might see, so they don't have to go chase down resources and references. So that's a real short version of our story. There's a lot of the what we learned along the way in the book, but that's the short version.
Yeah, that's amazing. Were there any personal stories that got you into, getting interested in cancer, or did you just slip in there?
You know, certainly like every family, our family has had some cancer affect it. But really the personal stories had more to do with our patients. Because patients would, as you go back 20 or more years ago, patients would come in, there wasn't a lot of really great information, and we would do supportive therapies. We would help them with their diet. We would maybe do some IV therapies or, any number of things. But it wasn't very well orchestrated or put together in my mind. And there was a lot to learn. We know a lot more now than we did back then. So the patient stories of watching the patients go through their cancer process, some would do better, some would not do so well. It made us continually want to learn and find new things that would help them. So it was very personal, but really more watching patients go through the process and wanting to help more.
Yeah, makes sense. So now with everything you've learned and all the experience you have, what is if you go on a little more abstract level, how do you maybe personally see cancer? What do you think it is from your perspective?
Oh, I think that, and this is something that we decided to put a whole chapter into the book about, about the ideas around the cause or genesis of cancer. And I think that, in Western thinking, we're usually fairly reductionistic about our way of looking at diseases, which is good because it gives some mechanisms and science and all of that. But when I was writing the chapter on the causes of cancer, what really came to me is it gave me some time to think about, okay, we have these three major kind of a triangle of cause ideas. And really, if you look at it, they're not different. They're just different sides of a problem. And so on one hand, you have cancer, which is it's a self-sustaining process that is, like all of us, it's about its own survival. And so once it gets started, it has any number of resources to make itself survive. And so one of the things I think that's really important to think about when you look at a lot of the therapies that we do or the interventions or how we change diets and things, what we're trying to do is say there's cancer trying to survive, and then there's you trying to survive, but you happen to live in the same place. So whether it is by decreasing epigenetic stressors and taking those down, or whether it is changing the metabolism, which Nasha does such an excellent job of going into, or whether it is so one of the newer ideas, which is actually a very old idea, it's just modern science took it over, is the cancer stem cell idea. All of them really go back to the idea that what we want to do is create environment so that the person has more survivability than the cancer does, and make it less and less able for the cancer to survive. So our and really this is what I've seen over the years. You'll have the experience of two patients pretty much the same age, same cancer, about the same, they appear the same really, and you do the same treatment and two totally different things happen with those patients. Well, there's obviously deeper reasons why, cancer survives in one and doesn't in another. And I think that's our constant quest, is to say, how many things can we do to make the patient the healthiest member of the of the problem?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's an ongoing question.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, just in writing how it is when you write something, you have to sit down and go back through all of the things you've thought and learned and unlearned. But just in writing the book, it was a good exercise in saying, wow, 5 years ago, we didn't even know this information, or 10 years ago, we didn't even think about it this way. We thought about it, kind of in a completely different way. And so, I'm sure in the next 5 years, we'll learn many things too.
Yeah. You mentioned the epigenetics. I'm assuming there's going to be a wave of data coming out that'll help us to see even that much clearer.
Yes, I think there's a couple of things that are going on that are important. One of them is that we see sometimes that people will say, well, there's, the genetic ideas and the metabolism ideas are antagonistic to one another. But really, when you look at it, if you correct the metabolism, when you do that, it takes away a lot of epigenetic stressors. And when you correct the metabolism, it takes away the stem cell activation. So really, they're all related to one another. I'm starting to work on a research project with a molecular pathologist where our goal over time is to see if we do nutritional interventions, can we decrease epigenetic stress in people who are prone to cancer? And that's something that right now we know, empirically, well, if we support this, we'll probably have less, trigger of the epigenome. And we see it clinically, but this would be a good next step, which is if we do the nutritional support, do we actually take down the epigenetic tags? So I'm very excited about that. But I think what we see clinically is what we'll find out from that.
So you're doing a lot of research as part of that we don't have enough data to back out our clinical experiences?
I think if you look at the evolution in 25 years between what we put in the book as far as research and what we had 25 years ago, we have, 5,000% more data than we used to about many, many things. In fact, there's, one of the things in the book, just to pick one, the use of Coriolis or Trametes, the mushroom. There's 400 peer-reviewed papers just on that one mushroom, in cancer. So there's a lot of research that's helping, but here's, I think, the most important thing, especially when I talk to other clinicians, because they maybe haven't dove into the research so much. For the most part, there's nothing that I haven't seen clinically that has worked in cancer or helped in cancer that the research hasn't just supported. It's not like the research was brand new and there's this brand new idea. It's more, this seems to work clinically, we're not sure why, and then the research kind of backs it up. So I think we'll see more of that. And that's, in my mind, that's just being a good clinician is you keep doing the things that are helpful and you reassess the things that don't seem to be helpful.
Yeah.
Then the research catches you later.
Yeah, right. Well, we just know there's some very critical people out there, so. Certainly,
yeah. And I think with cancer and the politics around cancer, it's, why people are critical. And we have to be careful, you have to be careful about making claims and all those things. But I think on the other hand, there's a lot of critics that will say, well, until it's proven, in a number of double-blind studies, we're not going to even think about it. And the problem that we have is too many patients have cancer right now who could be helped.
Yeah. That's an important point to think about.
Yeah. Yeah. And most of these therapies are really not dangerous if they're done correctly, changing your diet appropriately, nutritional supplements or herbal things or any of the other things we talked about done appropriately are really very, very safe compared to most other treatments.
Yeah. So from a critical perspective, at least they can't hurt, right?
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah. So I wanted to ask you, you've probably seen your share of damage done by the conventional therapies.
Sure.
Do you want to talk a little bit about that and maybe also in comparison to the integrative ones?
Yeah, we have, we have a whole chapter about recovery after standard therapy, and then we have interwoven into other chapters a lot of information about that. And I think there's two things that really hit me after putting the book together and looking, over all of this. One is when you have something like radiation or chemotherapy or surgery, it may indeed be helpful for a particular slice of a problem. But there's a lot of the rest of the patient that winds up having damage from it just because of the nature of the treatment. Surgery is, it doesn't matter what kind of surgery, you have to heal from it. Radiation is, obviously not something we normally experience in the way that you do in cancer. So there's a lot of healing there. And then chemotherapy, same way. But, you know, the modern chemotherapies may work a little different, but most chemotherapies are indiscriminate as far as what cells they damage. They'll damage you and the cancer at the same time. So I think regardless of all the other, you know, philosophical questions around all of that, if a person needs to or wants to do a radiation or surgery or chemotherapy, and let's say it's got a real high chance of helping them out, so they do it. What we tell them is there are so many things you can do to prepare for and or heal afterwards that, yes, that treatment's a piece of the puzzle, but there's this whole rest of you that needs to be taken care of. And so we often see people, they start to see us for side effect problems, and then they realize that they might actually be able to help their immune system and cancer set up that way. So that's one part. The other part, which you write in the book, which has been in a lot of research in the last 5 years, is the idea that the anti-tumor strategies often make the tumor stronger later. Mm-hmm. And it's a very well published idea that both radiation and chemotherapy will make the cancer stem cells go quiet, and then they come back stronger later in your life, which is why many people get recurrence of cancer. Right. So one of the things that we write about is, well, if that's true, which all the research says it is, then what you need to do is do therapies that don't allow your body to activate those stem cells. So the chemo or the radiation already makes them stronger. We want to keep them quiet. Mm-hmm. So, for example, all of the metabolic things that Nasha writes about, really one of the things they do very, very well is to keep the cancer stem cell very quiet, not turned on. Many of the herbal or some of the nutritional interventions we do, especially after chemotherapy, are aimed at keeping that quiet too. So it's really important, I think, to not look at it as, all one way or all the other way. It's not, one is bad, the other's bad. It's when is it appropriate to do the treatment with the person? And what we try to tell people is, whatever your oncologist has told you, let's look at the data and see if it, is it have a high success rate or low success rate? That's one thing. But they are good at this one part, and the other 90% of you needs the rest of the treatment.
Yeah. Makes sense. When you talk about the cancer stem cells getting stronger, are you referring to the that they are being treatment resistant, or?
Yeah, the idea that's coming out, which if someone listening is into historical cancer theories, what we write about in the book is that the old, it's almost 100 years old now, the old idea of the trophoblastic theory of cancer as sort of a primordial cell that goes out and creates cancer. What people are writing about now is that idea was probably the old version of the modern cancer stem cell idea. We just know more science now about stem cells. We didn't know we had stem cells back then, 100 years ago. So the idea is, like our stem cells when we're an embryo, the cancer will have really two categories of cells. So there's the cancer that's being treated, which might grow into a tumor or maybe in the blood in the hematologic cancer. But then there's its stem cells, which are really separate. And so if let's say chemotherapy or radiation kills the major tumor, the stem cell will actually go hide and wait. And what the data shows is that the more chemotherapy or radiation that we do, the stronger the stem cell gets at resisting. So yes, treatment resistance, but recurrence is the big thing. And we will have recurrence with more resistance to standard therapy. So you really have two problems with this cancer stem cell resistance. One is that they're there and they're stronger. The other is that they are what make you have cancer a second time or a third time.
Yeah. So is the approach just to keep it quiet, or is there any success in actually getting rid of them?
Well, if you read the standard research about cancer stem cells, what we see is that the researchers are hoping to find and develop drugs that would be targeted to cancer stem cells. There isn't such a thing right now, really. So the best, and here's, so if we look at the idea of we want to make the patient strong and the cancer as weak as possible, the thing that makes cancer stem cells strong outside of chemo and radiation is they actually have the chemistry to recruit your normal cells into being cancer cells. And so the goal is to take away all of the triggering chemistry from them so that they go back to being quiet. Now, what's not clear now is we know that we all make cancer cells every day and our immune system takes care of them. So we know that. That's one piece of the puzzle. But the other side of it is we may all have cancer stem cells that just sit there and don't do anything if we stay healthy. So we may not know a way to get rid of all of them, but we certainly know ways to keep them quiet. And so those start with the real core things around diet and exercise and the mental emotional state of the person. You know, we kind of figure those are the base of our, like a foundation. And I always tell patients, you know, if you don't have the foundation, then all the good treatments we put in just kind of fall through eventually, right? So if you, and this is what Nature writes about a lot too, is she just talks about it differently. If you're attending to your diet and you're attending to your physical body and you're attending to your mental and emotional state, you have a stronger base, which then the cancer doesn't have a great home in. So the stem cell can be strong, but it can't recruit. And that's, I think, the most important thing is there, you know, there's hope because your metabolism doesn't have to be friendly to cancer all the time.
Mm-hmm. So basically, I mean, we all know it's about prevention.
Right. Yeah.
Basically, that's what it is, right? So if we could tender to our bodies and emotional states so well, then we could maybe prevent a lot of the cancers.
Yeah, I think, you know, and of course, as we all see, there's always certain people who maybe have just a very aggressive or, you know, there's some trigger that makes it beyond their control. But I think, you know, if you look at the statistics, they go all the way from, you know, 40 to 65%, 70% cancers are preventable. Well, if that's the standard, you know, the standard data, then certainly we can prevent a lot more cancers than we have. And I think that's very important for people to know.
Yes. So the problem is, as practitioners, we get people coming into our practices or clinics when they have huge problems, but they don't always come in for prevention. So how, do you have any idea how we can get people to preventively?
You know, I've been struggling with that my whole career, as you have. And I think the first thing is on a good news side. If I look at the patients that came in from 25 to 15 years ago, they were all at the end of their life. We were the last people they would go see, you know, because it just was so out there to see anybody else. And in the last 15 years, what we've seen is more people would come in either to say, can you help me with these side effects? Or can you help me? I've had cancer and I'm clear, but I don't want to get cancer again. Or we get family members who come in and say, you know, my brother just died of colon cancer. I want to prevent. So I think it's starting to get more, I think educating people that they're, you know, most of the public feels that cancer is something that just kind of comes in on you and you can't do anything about it. Mm-hmm. And I think educating them that, you know, indeed in 50, 60, 70% of cases, there are things we can do to avoid cancer. Eventually that message will get through. And I think it's starting to happen now because more people are actually writing and speaking about prevention. Mm-hmm. Whereas all the money in the past went into drug development and let's treat you after you get cancer, you know. So I think the messaging is important and people like you and I continue to talk about it and that makes it more in the mind of people.
Yeah. That's my hope too. I have some hope in that we're going to get better tracking devices that can tell us more instantly what's going on with our bodies every day. Mm-hmm. That's my big hope.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, from the point of view of whether it's the stem cells or the metabolism shifting or, epigenetic triggers, I think because most of the time, by the time you have a tumor you can find, it's probably been growing for 5 to 10 years. So I think if we can see 10 years ago, gee, the metabolism is shifting in this direction, or the epigenome is turned on in this direction, I think that would be very, very useful. And now we have technology that can do that. So
Yeah.
let's hope it gets developed in that direction. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe we can hop into that. I mean, by reading your book, there are so many points. I have 4 pages of questions here, so we'll never get to them. But
Okay.
let's pick out a few. So you just mentioned that. So in the direction towards sensitive cancer markers, circulating tumor cells. Is there anything that normal practitioners can already use in the clinic, or are those fancy treatments that are only left for research?
No, I think that thymos like circulating tumor cells and some of the what I would call tumor biology markers like thymidine kinase and some of the other markers that are there, I think those things are available. What I will say is 7 or 8 years ago, for example, circulating tumor cells, when we were doing cancer research, we tried to use serial circulating tumor cells that were available back then, and they weren't very sensitive. They really didn't help us with knowing where the disease was going. I think the circulating tumor cell technology we have now is extremely promising, and for some tumors, very reliable. So that's one. The other thing is there are ways to look at the background metabolism, or the metabolome, and it's just we don't think of doing it that way. For example, Naisha has a couple of markers like CRP and things that she uses, and we have a little bit broader panel that we do. And it's not that any one is specific to cancer, but if we see them all trending towards inflammation or trending towards other triggers, we know that that's not something has to change about the way that person is eating, supplementing, exercise. Something has to change. Yeah. So I think that's evolving, and there's a lot of new things on the horizon too, which is why I'm excited to do this project with these epigenetic tags, which is something we have the technology because they've been looking at them in brain tumors for a long time. Mm-hmm. But what we would like to do is expand them to the prevention side and see if there's a way to do that. Yeah. That's
great. So I had a question about, and this is changing topics a little bit, but about cachexia, because cachexia seems to be one of the bigger problems. And recently came across a study again that it's more of a metabolic problem than an energy intake problem. So what's your approach to that?
Yeah, cachexia is one of the most difficult things in advanced cancers because it's often what kills the patient is the literal cachexia and breakdown of the body. We work with this all the time, and if you look at there's a couple of papers that have reviewed cachexia, and the very best one comes from the journal Nature's Cancer Journal. And they go through, and there's actually 7 different areas that they say have to be addressed for cachexia to stop. Most of them are metabolic. And the problem is, again, because they're writing to the normal hospital audience, they don't know exactly how to do 7 things at one time. But if you look, there's hormonal metabolic triggers. There are inflammatory metabolic triggers. There are, of course, caloric and calorie balance metabolic triggers and a couple of other things that really are core to that. And what we found is if we can work with as many as we can interact with, okay, you can't interact with all of them, but if we can work with as many as possible and get the metabolism stable, we can actually either slow down or stop the cachexia. The problem is once it starts to go and the cells are breaking down so that the cancer gets fed, or they're breaking down because of the cachexia problem, it's very hard to stop once it gets going. So that's something that we always monitor patients extremely highly for, is their body mass. So it's not just weight, because weight could be fat or it could be muscle, all that. But if the muscle's actually breaking down, you need to intervene as much as you possibly can. Excuse me. And they're even looking at the use of secretagogues to help with, for example, growth factor secretagogues and other things like that are mostly research oriented. But apparently those, and we've done them with a few people, but those appear to be, if the diet and the metabolism and the other inflammatory things are cut down, getting growth factor secretagogues going back in actually can turn cachexia around too. So.
Okay. How much of that is part of the actual disease, or if we can still call things diseases, or how much of it is part of the treatment? Is it part of the chemo maybe? Or?
It's a little of both, really. Depending on what kind of, let's say, chemotherapy, radiation, that can put people, metabolically into a position where they're not keeping body mass on. So that's certainly one problem. The other problem is let's say you take chemotherapy and radiation out of it, when, you have you and cancer trying to be as healthy as possible. As the cancer gets stronger or bigger in its mass, it literally changes the metabolism so that your metabolism loses and it wins to some degree. And so it goes back to that idea of, then we have to do everything we can not to allow the cancer to go that direction. Something I did want to say, because we're talking about growth factors, and of course, in the Nature review article, they're looking at, well, can we make a drug that would trigger the growth factors, and all that. One thing we tell patients is, if they activate their core muscles in their body, so the legs and the postural muscles in the middle, that actually triggers the same or similar growth factors that oppose cachexia. Mm-hmm. And so as opposed to in North America here, where most oncology centers say, oh, just eat as much as you want and, get your weight up. What they're talking about is getting fat higher, right? Yeah. What we tell people is get your weight up, but make it muscle mass, because if it's high muscle mass, you actually have a longer lifespan. If you have high fat, you have a shorter lifespan. Well, one of the reasons for that happens to be that the anti-cachexia growth factors are triggered by me working my muscles. So, one important factor is, you take somebody who's very sick and they'll say, well, I can't exercise, So we say, no, how many times do you stand up during the day? How far do you walk during the day? Just do a little bit more of that, and that actually will exercise the muscle. And that's, I think, one of the most critical factors. And it goes back to the foundation of mental, emotional, diet, and and physical activity.
Yeah, the basics, the foundation. Mm-hmm. I like that picture of the foundation. Mm-hmm. So you don't seem to be too concerned about adding in nutrients if somebody has cachexia, to add in nutrients for proteins, I saw in the book, and protein powders or amino acids.
Yeah, I think there's sort of two things to consider, and I think if you see through the book, everything is based on where the patient is at that moment. So whether it's, should I do chemo or not, we look at, well, does the chemo have a statistical chance of helping or not? So when it comes to things like proteins, et cetera, when people are getting cachexic, it's different than maybe non-cachexic active cancer treatment. So when you're cachexic, you need to feed your muscles, or the muscle cells are not going to stay together. Mm-hmm. During active cancer treatment, we're more judicious with the volume of protein, because what really happens is, if you overfeed with protein, you don't want too little protein, but if you overfeed with protein during active cancer, downstream amino acids will not have a use, and so they could go and create more metabolism, pro-cancer metabolism. But in cachexia, that's not what we're worried about there. What we're worried about there is more their metabolism and repair. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. Okay. there's so many topics. I want to pick a few so the reader can read all these. You talk about toxins, you talk about so many things. Do you
Yeah.
want to delve into that, or?
Um, I'll just do a quick version of some of these things. So the other side of the foundations is that there's, once we have cancer and we're treating cancer, or treating the patient with cancer to make them not, have less cancer, many things have to be minimized, but we don't necessarily treat them until the cancer is stable and we're doing prevention or secondary prevention. Some of those things are toxins. Now we want to detoxify their life as much as possible. We work with them on, getting clean water and not having, packaged foods with a lot of chemicals in it, and getting chemicals as much out of their environment as possible. So do as much as you can, sort of hygienically, to remove chemistry. After cancer, though, in a secondary prevention, we call it, where you've already had cancer, but now we're going to prevent secondary cancer, we very aggressively look at all of those other things, such as, chronic infections and toxins and residual diet issues and hormones and, all of those areas. So, and we go into it deeply in the book, but I think patients will sometimes not see that there's a appropriate time for each sort of phase of treatment. Mm-hmm. When you have cancer that's active, we want to be very aggressive about the cancer and make it weaker. When you come and you say, I have no evidence of cancer anymore, but I do not want to get any more cancer, then we're very aggressive about all these other things that feed into it.
Okay, that's good to know. Some of the things that I found a little concerning, and I have to admit I'm not an expert on the viruses, but you mentioned some very common viruses like EBV, even a bacteria like H. pylori. So some of them seem quite common. How big do you think is their influence, or how should we push them back before we see there even?
Well, I think that that's always the biggest question in my mind. It's, if you look at something like Epstein-Barr, EBV, most humans have been exposed, but that doesn't mean most humans are active with it, okay? And so I think what happens is, whether it's somebody that we see who is got chronic fatigue and they've got Epstein-Barr or whatever, that maybe is a level that should be treated and pushed back. Somebody who's healthy and their immune system keeps all of those non-active, probably not such a big deal. I think the thing with the chronic infections is, as the human gets less robustly healthy, has less immune activity, they will come and they will just take resources from the immune system, and that's often a weak immune system is what allows the cancer to come.
Right.
What I will say on the other side is, in 100% of people that I have seen who have no evidence of cancer anymore, so they've beaten their cancer, 100% have one or more chronic infections that are active and do need to be treated. And there's a number of reasons for that, but my feeling is, from what I see with patients, whether it's the active infection or the toxins or the hormone imbalance or whatever, you must do what you can to correct that in the post-cancer state, because they don't have the immune system that a healthy person has. Mm-hmm. And you can't leave those infections there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, makes sense. So let me see. One thing I found interesting, you mentioned that almost everybody, we know that at least 70% of the population is low in magnesium, but you said with active cancer, it's even less, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's sort of like you see with many trace minerals like selenium and chromium and zinc, which are very important to many immune functions. With active cancer, the depletion just accelerates. So you start low and it just gets lower. Mm-hmm. And the problem is that in most of those cases, we don't get symptoms from it. You might have symptoms you don't understand, but most of the cases no one checks. So nobody looks. If you start to lower magnesium levels and zinc and selenium, et cetera, and in cancer that does accelerate, and with cancer treatment, it accelerates very fast, your immune system and many other processes can't keep up. So again, you're just making yourself more prone towards cancer growth. So yes, nutrient deficiency is across the board in most humans, but in cancer patients, it's very, very bad. So we are very attentive to, especially minerals. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So that's my hope that in the future it'll be standard to test for nutrient deficiencies, right? As it should be.
Yeah. I think what happens, and here's, we mentioned in a couple of chapters in the book, it's in the literature that there's nutrient deficiencies in almost every cancer patient. I mean, it's sort of like if you have cancer, assume that, but nobody checks for it in the standard, world right now. And so that's something that we often do on the front end with people is we do check in. It's not if you're deficient, it's how bad and what do we need to do about that.
Actually, which tests do you use for that? Do you like blood tests that show more short-term deficiency? Do you like things like SpectraCell? I don't know what your experiences is with more short-term and long-term evaluation.
Yeah, all of the nutrient testing, they all work in different ways and they have different benefits. Minerals are easier to talk about because they're more linear in the way that they work. What we normally do is we do a panel of red blood cell minerals or elements. And the reason for that is most red blood cell levels are more in line with what your cell levels are in the rest of your body. So we will usually do that as a screening. Now, some things like copper and a few of the other ones, we also look at plasma and a few other measurement. But minerals are pretty good. Vitamins are tough because there's so many. The standard lab tests are not very good because they measure whole pools of vitamins instead of the active forms right now. In the future, different. So things like SpectraCell or other things kind of look at a functional measurement of that. So if we get to vitamins, we'll use one of those other types of tests. What I normally do is I do get baselines on all the minerals, and then the vitamins we will replete the person and we'll assume issues. And then we'll look at special things like is their blood count off in a way that would say they're not methylating well, or do they have genetic SNPs that are in a certain way, and we'll supplement around those too.
Are you concerned about high doses of active folate for supplementation?
That's probably one of the most common questions I get. What I normally see is, and we don't do too much in the book because it's written more for patients, but in physician trainings do a lot on this. When it comes to methyl donors like methyl B12, methyl folate, those things, it's more about correcting imbalances. So here's what I usually tell people is we want to, if they're low, we want to replace it, but we don't want to stay super high dose forever. You don't need super high dose. But once it's replaced, what the data seems to show is if you go back down to the normal maintenance level, which they probably didn't have before, you can stay clear without triggering the cancer, et cetera. With folate, there's one little sliver of if you give it during like an active say colon cancer or something like that, you have to be a little careful because a colon cancer is different biology. But if it's prevention, if it's low grade colon cancer, et cetera, that's really not an issue. The other thing I usually tell people is if we can get them to do vegetable juicing. There's actually a lot of European food data that shows that you can get a mixture of the active forms of folate in your darker green vegetables and things like that. And if it's a smaller person or if it's just maintenance, they can get everything they need from juicing the vegetable. The upside is there's also a lot of anti-cancer properties in the vegetable, so you're not just giving an isolated, folate or something.
Yeah, that makes sense. Any concerns with things like oxalate or anything when there's a lot of green juices?
I think again, it's a little bit like the story about, say, protein powders and things like that. If the person's really sick, we don't worry so much. But if we're looking at prevention or during active treatment, and they're not cachexic, green juices are good, but we don't overdo them, right? We have some balance to it. And what I see clinically is let's say you're juicing, a fair amount of greens, and we usually have people, if they can, do whole juice as opposed to extraction juicing. And the reason we do that is they keep the flavonoids and the fiber and, the stuff that usually gets pulled out of a regular juice. What we find is if the flavonoids and the fiber stay with the juice, we really don't, number one, the oxalate levels don't spike, but also we just don't get a lot of the other concerns around, phytates and the oxalates and the other nasty things there. But also we don't have people doing, 10 juices a day or so. It's usually as a supplement more than their food.
When you say whole juice, you mean more like a smoothie form?
Yeah, so like you would get with, say, a Vitamix or a Blend Tech or one of those. So it's extraction juicers are, you put it in the top, and then there's usually a filter, and you dump all this junk out afterwards. All the junk you dump out is where the flavonoids and the fiber and all the good stuff is. So people have to get used to, it's a thicker thing, but it's got much better nutrient balance for most people. Yeah.
Sounds good. And you know what? I still have to get back to that prevention of the chronic infections one more time.
Yeah.
So if you have a patient coming in and they don't have active cancer yet, but you do know they have, Lyme disease, spirochetes, or EBV high levels, so they're in that pre-stage, then you would address it, right?
Oh, certainly, yes. If it's either primary prevention or secondary prevention, the chronic infections have to be addressed. And I will tell people basically that, actually now in the US, they have added Epstein-Barr as a potential carcinogenic infection. It didn't used to be. I mean, it was in the data, but it wasn't official, So what we tell people is, while you're healthy, this is the time not to have these in your system. Now, to pick on, we could pick on many infections, but to pick on Epstein-Barr family, so that cytomegalovirus, Epstein-Barr, HHVs, lots of them. The reason they're probably so bad is that they like to go and live in two places when they kind of fall back in the body. One is in the lymphatic system, which is a place you don't want infection staying, because then your B cells and your T cells are constantly assaulted. The other is in your nervous system, which causes neurological inflammation, which is a whole other problem. So yes, if it's in the prevention stage, you really, and this is where we get into sort of a big difference of opinion with the standard medical community, where they will say, well, those are probably not important infections. And I will tell the patient, no, they are very important, because you can't have your immune system constantly assaulted by these things, even if you don't have a lot of symptoms. Yeah. So I feel that's very important to clear up.
Okay, good. Just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah.
So in a sense, I mean, I still have pages over pages of, treatment interventions. I would say they are in the book, right? Is that right? Or is something
something we did, and the way we did it is kind of built the case for different treatments. So we start out with some basic things, such as the first part of the book actually is their hope by doing integrative cancer care. And so we just give some patient stories, and show, kind of what we've been through. And then we go to some of the basics, such as, so why are we interested in the immune system in cancer and the metabolism in cancer and the epigenome and all this stuff? Well, we make a case there for, well, this is where it gets started. And then the rest of the book really is mostly, why would, so we have a whole section on oral therapies that would address nutrient things, immune things, switching cancer off, all of these different things. So we kind of go deep dive into each substance. We also do that with IV therapies, which is a lot of what I do with my patients. And then we have a whole chapter that goes into not just the theoretical treatment of different cancers, but these are the things we've found over the years that are most important for a breast cancer patient or a patient with active colon cancer, et cetera, et cetera. So we pick a large group of the most common cancers. And while there's a lot of similarities in the treatments, some have some very specific things to them. So yeah, the treatments are, we kind of give them to you separated to show you their science, and then how do we combine them in the, in their own chapter.
For each.
And then we take it to the other level of how to recover from standard therapy is its own section, totally different stuff. And then how to prevent recurrence or secondary prevention. So we go pretty deep into all that. Yeah.
Yeah, great. So we will definitely recommend people read the book. I actually, maybe later on we'll talk about sending people to some of your trainings.
Okay.
So I have another question. I still see a lot of people that are looking for the magic pill. And in my world, where I'm not directly treating cancer, but just supporting the foundations, maybe glutathione and fasting are some of the things that get pretty close to the magic pill.
Yeah.
But in a sense, is cancer our friend, as bad as it sounds? But does it scare people so much that they're finally willing to change their diet and lifestyle?
I think in the sense that cancer is one thing that will make people change things they wouldn't change otherwise, which is, it's too bad. It'd be better if they came earlier and said, what can I do so I don't, get sick? But cancer does put people in that position of, I have to change, I don't have an option. And yeah, I think it's human nature that we want the simplest answer to whatever our problem is. And cancer is not a simple problem. If I had, and again, this is not maybe optimal, but, if someone comes and they say, I can't afford, any supplements, I can't afford any other treatments, et cetera. Can you do anything for me? What I usually say is, well, you still have to eat. So there's a couple things about eating that are very important. One is what you eat, of course, and it's like what Naisha gets into very deeply about switching your metabolism. But the other is fasting, as you brought up, and intermittent fasting during your life. Probably one of the most potent things that you can do to suddenly shift your metabolism. So what we do with people is we will often do an induction fast on the beginning of treatment. So they may do 72 hours, or some people will do, say, a week with like a broth fast, or kind of an old-fashioned fast that way, to just get the metabolism to wake up and say, oh, we must be doing something different now. But then every day, what we have people do is restrict the time that they eat, so do daily intermittent fasting. And in the book, we had one study with humans that we show that people who've already had breast cancer, and they didn't even change their diet really, they just restricted their eating to 13 hours off. Just by doing that, there was a third less recurrence in the breast cancer. We often will do, unless a person is cachexic, we will often do 13 to 15 hours of just non-caloric liquids, water, tea with nothing in it, etc., and then have them eat during the 12 or less hour window. And that in itself is so potent because it resets all of your chemistry during the fast period. So we'll talk to people about, yes, you have to buy food and eat. So you can eat differently, and you can do fasting without dying and all of that. The other thing is you have to move every day. So let's get the core muscles working, and you that's free. You can do that. What the choices of what you choose to eat can be very nutrient dense, or they can be very junk dense. And so that's a huge intervention right there. And then honestly, and you can imagine, with a diagnosis of cancer, all of the fear and everything that comes with it. So how we work on the mental emotional part is just as important as, the other things. And that's free mostly too. You may need some help with it, but so we always tell people that there's so much of the working with cancer and preventing cancer that's in your, it's in your control. It's just getting your mind to say, oh, okay, I will do that because that's going to help me. Yeah. That's the big hurdle for people. Yeah.
So I saw in the book that you do recommend patients do their own research as well, right? And look into the whole thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, certainly. I think that, being informed does a few things. One of them is it makes your thinking process change because you're as you see all the time, the patients who get better are the ones who become involved and who want to do things to be better. And so if if a patient has the mindset that well, you're the practitioner, so you should treat me, well, that's a little piece of it. It's not something you have done to you, it's something you participate in. And so the more that you know about it, maybe people might research things and not know one is better than the other or something, but the more they're thinking about it, the more that it engages their mind in the idea, I need to do this, and this is probably very helpful for me. So they have a motivation to,
Yeah.
and they're educated. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And maybe it doesn't become this scary monster that is
Yeah.
fightable.
And and if they read things like Radical Remission or Naisha's book, where they talk about people who have lived very, very long times, with their cancer, it's possible to do. We see that all the time. But I think just because of media and bad messaging, and you watch family go through maybe a very bad experience with cancer, then it becomes the big bad thing, and that's actually more damaging to you.
Yeah, the stress. So people that are slightly or even more advanced cachexic, you would not recommend any kickstarting, even with like a day fast or something?
Oh yeah, so that's a good question. Thank you. This actually comes up at the one hospital I work with in Mexico, and they were very worried about cachexic patients and intermittent fasting. And two things. One is they can do a kickstart of 24, 36 hours, really no problem. We just hydrate them really well. That's not long enough to make someone more cachexic. Okay? Mm-hmm. And in fact, it changes their chemistry in a better direction. Mm-hmm. The other thing with active cachexia we do is we kind of stick to a 13-hour daily intermittent fast, so that they have 11 hours during which we have them do, say, MCTOL every periodic, throughout the day, and we have them do things to help there. So even in cachexia, it's still the Kickstarter to get the attention of the system is still very important. It just, you maybe need to be a little more cautious with their stability.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So there's some practitioners that I talk to that, would maybe be interested in treating cancer or working in the cancer world, but they're really scared. Mm-hmm. And I think part of it is the emotional side also for the practitioner. Mm-hmm. You have to potentially deal with suffering, you have to deal with pain, maybe more than in other areas. What is your experience in that field, and what can you say about that?
Mm. I would say that's 100% correct. It's the hardest thing, that I've done as a practitioner. I think the second hardest is people with other chronic illnesses that are not, not fatal, but they're chronic. Mm-hmm. And I think that what I've learned over time, and going through a lot of both good and very bad experiences with people going through cancer, is you can't control all of that. You do your best with the patients, et cetera, and that's where your job and control stops. So the things that I have found are, you have to take care of yourself as a practitioner. You have to be mindful that you are dealing with something that is, more people die of than many other things. And also you have to remember that when you're sitting face to face or working with somebody who has cancer, there's a lot of emotional energy and things that you can, take on to yourself. All of those things can make the practitioner sick, and not feel well and not want to do that. And so part of it is, in my mind, you need some sort of centering practice that you do every day, where you come back to these are the things I can control and these are the things I don't have control over. You need an ability to kind of clear out from the day and, mentally and physically kind of clear out from everything you've been exposed to. Because if you don't do that, then what you do is you bring all that into you in the interaction with your patient the next day. And it clouds your judgment, it clouds your ability to connect, et cetera. And what you find is most people who work with cancer patients have particular schedules that they do where they do good self-care, and they have, you know, little breaks and things, and they have a way to deal with it. But the worst thing is to pretend that doesn't exist.
Okay.
Yeah. I wanted to ask if I can have 30 seconds to grab my power cord so that we don't lose power.
We can do that. Sure. Or we can close up. That's possible too.
Okay, I've probably got a few minutes left. I just didn't want to disappear suddenly.
That's maybe because it's gonna get exhausting for you. Let's close up with saying that there's a lot more in the book, and I'm not exaggerating. There's all these, there's nutrition, there's all the integrative interventions. There's some really advanced interventions, cutting edge interventions, which I found very interesting, but I don't think we're going to get to talk about them today. So you have to read the book. And you are also training practitioners, right? Besides the book. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so I have a number of places that I do training. I do a lot in the integrative medicine community. I have an education website for practitioners. You just go to consultdra.com, and on there is a calendar of where I'm going and where I'm teaching and things. But also on there is a lot of articles I've written, and there's some CE webinars, things of that nature. So that website, consultdra.com, is the kind of the hub. And then there's 2 conferences a year that I personally put together and run, and they're called Advanced Applications in Medical Practice. We have one coming up in Scottsdale, June 1st, 2nd, 3rd, on neurological healing and PANDAS syndromes and a lot of brain repair, we call it. We do that twice a year, and if you go on my website, you can find that, or just AAMP, so AAM like Mary, P like Paul, conferences.com. You can see that as well. So those are the ones. And this is the cute book that they made. I have nothing to do with it. The artist did this. I think it's very nice, though. What I'll say, just because you brought up sort of advanced therapies, when I was involved in the cancer research, we were able to do many things that maybe you can't even do now, but we hope for the future that, you know, we discovered they work, right? I tried to put all of those in there just so people were aware that, you know, someone had actually looked at this and how did it come out with patients. And so there may be some that are, you know, practitioners don't have availability to, but the idea is the information's out there, then more people will study it, and it will be done, you know, in places. And then our hope is this becomes more of not an alternative, but something that we do, you know, with people no matter what. So.
Yeah, very good. I did have a last question for you. If you had in an ideal world, how would, I mean, I know dreaming here, but how would it look for you?
You know, I think in an ideal world, there'd be a few factors. One would be that we would start educating people from earliest time how to stay healthy, you know, and how important things are, such as having as clean of a diet as you can, and avoiding toxins, and, you know, all those things that keep us healthy, and physical exercise, all those things. And I know that we talk about it, but I think we'd be more purposeful about it from a young age.
Including public health, right?
Yeah, including public health, which, right, yeah, that's the other topic. But I think from, you know, from the government and the public health down to the physicians and the practitioners, everybody, it would be different. The other thing I think I would do is looking at people who have a higher risk of cancer, doing more preventive screening, such as chronic infections, toxins, endocrine things. And let's work on those before we get cancer, you know. Then during the cancer process, honestly, what I would like to see is more like the hospital I work at in Mexico, where there's not a lot of barriers to these things. The chief of oncology and myself and other practitioners all have an equal voice. Right. So we make a treatment plan. If the patient needs something the oncologist can provide, they will ask us what we can do to make it less toxic or make it whatever. And so the nutrition people get involved, and the, you know, the physical medicine people and the mental emotional people. Everybody kind of has an equal vote. And that way, I think if we could move to that in the hospital systems and the outpatient cancer systems, and not have this only one idea works and everything else we're afraid of, I think that would turn it upside down. And then the secondary prevention, if you did have cancer and you got through it, what can we do to get you so you don't have it again? I think that would be my perfect world. And we might live long enough for that. You never know.
We may see it. I hope so too.
That's right.
I actually had I think it was a client asking me about BRCA, the BRCA gene. You know, so in the statistics, you always see, oh, your risk is whatever, 70% higher, 40% higher. What do you think epigenetically, you know, with nutrigenomics, if a person like that is monitored and the estrogen levels are kept low, the you know, the xenoestrogens are low and all these things?
Yeah, I think, you know, if you look at it, and I'll summarize real quickly, so in case I lose battery, I'll wave. But I think the most important thing is it's around 50-55% with BRCA that develop cancer. So then you have to ask, well, why did the other 45 to 50% not get cancer? That's all epigenetic triggering. So yes, if you have, and we're going to find many, many more of these associations. And really what they are is there's the gene, but then there's all the epigenetic triggers such as xenoestrogen, et cetera, and methylation problems. All of those fit in. So just like someone has a chronic infection, we would want to get rid of that. If they have BRCA, or if they have any of the other things, let's fix their methylation. Let's balance their genome out. Let's take away every epigenetic trigger we can think of. And the number of people then who express that gene problem are going to go way down. It's just that we have those statistics from the modern world, which is very full of infections, all of those things.
Yeah, great, perfect. Yeah, I think those were most of my questions. We could have gone on for an hour, but
yeah, we could keep going. But thank you so much for having me. It's been fun.
Same here. I'm going to put a link to the book and to your website so people can find it. And I just ordered it. I think it just arrived, or it's just going to arrive soon.
Well, good. Okay. All right. Well, I will see you soon. And
talk to you soon.
Okay. Bye-bye.